Good evening. Tonight, we examine a case that has shaken Kenya to its core and raised fundamental questions about police accountability, digital rights, and the rule of law in East Africa's largest democracy. The story begins with a simple social media post. On June 4, 2025, a 31-year-old teacher and blogger named Albert Ojwang published content on the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, that was critical of Kenya's Deputy Inspector General of Police, Eliud Lagat. What Ojwang likely considered routine political commentary would ultimately cost him his life and ignite a national crisis that continues to this day. Within hours of Ojwang's post, Deputy Inspector General Lagat had filed a formal complaint with Kenya's Directorate of Criminal Investigations. The machinery of state power began moving with remarkable speed. 3 days later, on June 7th, police officers arrived at Ojwang's family home in Homa Bay County, where he was having lunch with his mother. They arrested him on charges related to his online criticism of the Deputy Inspector General. What happened next has become the subject of intense scrutiny and controversy. Ojwang was transported over 200 miles from his home to Nairobi Central Police Station. Within hours of his arrival in the capital, Albert Ojwang was dead. The official police account of Ojwang's death immediately raised suspicions. Authorities claimed that the blogger had died from self-inflicted head injuries, allegedly sustained when he struck his head against his cell wall. This narrative began unraveling almost immediately when medical professionals and family members questioned the circumstances. An independent autopsy later contradicted the police version of events, though specific details of these findings remain part of ongoing legal proceedings. News of Ojwang's death spread rapidly across Kenya's highly connected social media landscape. The response was swift and furious. Thousands of protesters, predominantly young Kenyans, took to the streets of Nairobi and other major cities. Their chants were simple but powerful: "Stop killing us," and "Justice for Albert." The demonstrations reflected deep-seated frustrations with police brutality that had been building for years, particularly following the deadly crackdown on anti-tax protests in 2024. The protests were not confined to peaceful demonstrations. In Homa Bay County, Ojwang's home region, angry crowds burned down a police station. The violence that followed resulted in additional casualties and injuries, creating a cycle of confrontation between citizens and law enforcement that authorities struggled to contain. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Deputy Inspector General Lagat temporarily stepped aside from his duties on June 16th to allow investigations to proceed. This move, while welcomed by some as a sign that accountability was possible, did little to quell public anger. Human rights organizations and civil society groups began mobilizing for what they saw as a test case for Kenya's commitment to justice and police reform. The legal battle that has emerged reveals the complexities of prosecuting high-ranking officials in Kenya's system. Human rights activists have filed petitions seeking private prosecution of Deputy Inspector General Lagat, arguing that what they term an extrajudicial killing demands accountability at the highest levels. However, Lagat's legal team has mounted a sophisticated defense centered on prosecutorial discretion. Through his lawyer Cecil Miller, Lagat argues that Kenyan courts do not have the authority to compel criminal prosecution. Instead, he contends that only the Director of Public Prosecutions has the constitutional mandate to decide whether charges should be filed. This legal argument strikes at the heart of Kenya's separation of powers and raises questions about whether high-ranking officials can effectively shield themselves from prosecution through procedural arguments. The case has taken another controversial turn, with reports that Lagat has been cleared by investigators and returned to his duties. This development has further inflamed public sentiment and raised questions about the independence and thoroughness of the investigation process. To understand the broader significance of the Albert Ojwang case, we must place it within Kenya's recent history of police brutality and citizen activism. The country is still processing the trauma of last year's anti-tax protests, during which security forces killed dozens of demonstrators. Those events marked a turning point in Kenya's post-independence history, with young people directly confronting what they saw as an unaccountable government. The Ojwang case has particular resonance because it highlights the intersection of digital rights and state power. In an era where social media has become the primary platform for political discourse, the suggestion that criticism of officials can lead to arrest and death represents a fundamental threat to democratic expression. Kenya's digital landscape has been vibrant and largely free, making the apparent targeting of online critics all the more concerning to observers. International attention has focused intensely on how Kenya handles this case. As a key partner of Western nations and a regional power in East Africa, Kenya's human rights record carries implications beyond its borders. The international community is watching to see whether the country's democratic institutions can deliver justice in a case that has captured global attention. The economic implications should not be overlooked either. Kenya has positioned itself as a technology hub and a destination for international investment. Incidents that suggest arbitrary arrest and extrajudicial killing can damage this reputation and affect investor confidence. The government faces pressure to demonstrate that rule of law prevails, particularly in cases involving political expression. For Kenya's youth, who make up the majority of the population, the Albert Ojwang case represents more than a single tragedy. It embodies their broader frustrations with governance, accountability, and their place in society. The intensity of their response suggests that this case could become a defining moment for a generation that has grown up with unprecedented access to information and platforms for expression. The legal precedents established by this case will reverberate far beyond Kenya's borders. Other countries in the region are watching to see whether high-ranking security officials can be held accountable for deaths in custody. The outcome could either strengthen or weaken similar accountability mechanisms across East Africa. As this case continues to unfold, several critical questions remain unanswered. Can Kenya's judicial system assert its independence against powerful security officials? Will the Director of Public Prosecutions demonstrate the political will to pursue justice regardless of the defendant's position? And perhaps most importantly, can Kenya's democratic institutions prove strong enough to deliver accountability in a case that has become a symbol of the struggle between authoritarian tendencies and democratic aspirations? The Albert Ojwang case is far from over. As legal proceedings continue and public pressure mounts, Kenya finds itself at a crossroads. The resolution of this case will send a powerful message about the country's commitment to human rights, rule of law, and the protection of digital expression. For Albert Ojwang's family and the thousands who have taken to the streets demanding justice, the stakes could not be higher. The world is watching to see whether a young democracy can hold its most powerful officials accountable, or whether the badge and uniform provide immunity from the very laws they are sworn to uphold. In many ways, the future of Kenya's democratic trajectory may well depend on how this case is resolved. This is the story of Albert Ojwang, a teacher who became a symbol, a critic who paid the ultimate price, and a case that continues to test the very foundations of justice in Kenya.